Hi, everybody. We are going to talk about developing a qualitative research instrument, qualitative questionnaire. So this is week 3, and this is your major assignment for this week. So your data collection instrument and the rubric is here, and there's some information here that can help you. But what I want to focus on tonight is how do you develop a qualitative instrument? So you can see here in bold, it says students are encouraged to use an existing instrument or instruments instead of developing one from scratch. I've gone back and forth over the years of keeping that statement in, pulling it out, kind of how to treat it. The reason for my fluctuation with how to treat that statement is because in quantitative, it is much easier to find a ready-made instrument, right? You can find a study, and it could be a combination of instruments. Whenever we say instrument, it's okay to consolidate or pull parts of one and combine it with another. There is a method to that madness. It shouldn't just be haphazard, like, oh, I think I'll take these 2 questions and 3 from here and 2 from this instrument. There is a way to make sure that you're pulling them correctly so that you're not, hurting the integrity of the instrument. Chances are, if it's an instrument that has been published, it's validated, which is a good thing, and that helps you with your research. So in order to not, bring down the integrity of the validity and the instrument, you want to be sure you're pulling those correctly. So you can work, when you get to your dissertation, you can work with your methodologist to determine, and your advisor to determine which sets of questions or individual questions that you can pull from an instrument and not have to use the whole thing. Sometimes you're using an entire instrument. Either way, okay, but that's quantitative. So with qualitative, it can be done. You can definitely find a ready-made instrument, but it is much more difficult to find that in qualitative. The reason for that is qualitative is usually niche research, right? And it's so specified and it's small. So finding a questionnaire that asks the exact questions that you need to know within your niche population to answer your research questions is, kind of slim. Does it happen? Absolutely. So do I encourage you to find something, especially for the time frame of this course, that's ready-made? Yes. However, you don't always hit that jackpot. So what else can you do? So there's 3 main approaches or methods to developing a qualitative instrument. So the first one is really what I just said, right? To find an existing instrument. And I just want to reiterate, number 1, if you do find something, it can be 1 or more instruments pulled together and pieces of them pulled together. And you can use the questions verbatim, so exactly how they are, or they can be slightly modified. So for example, if you find a terrific questionnaire that asks the types of questions you want, but let's say it's in the healthcare industry, and so the context of the questions are healthcare related, and you're in the hospitality industry, can you change those? Yes. So you might ask, what are your feelings on merit rewards in, the question might say, the healthcare industry? You might change that to in the hospitality industry. So that's kind of the slightly modified. If you get, and it's the context, the qualifiers, things like that. If you start changing the words of the kind of the base of the question, that's where you can get into a little bit of sticky trouble. Sometimes it's okay and you can make it work. But again, to do that, you're running that by your advisor and your methodologist. So you want to, not just do it haphazardly. Okay. And that is the same approach if you're finding an instrument for quantitative and qualitative in terms of all the things I just mentioned. All right, so the second way for qualitative, and technically it's the same for quantitative too, but for a dissertation, if you're doing quantitative, we really encourage you to go with the first one, because if you go with the second one, the third one would be the same as the first if you're doing quantitative, but the second one, if you do that for quantitative, which is obviously a very valid approach, you have to be able to validate your instrument, which means you have to pilot test it, which means you have to add time. So for a dissertation, we don't want you spending that extra time. So we usually will, try to discourage a pilot test, and help, encourage you to find a ready-made instrument. In qualitative, you don't have to do the same type of pilot testing with your instrument. So if you're writing your own questions, you might do a pre-test, which I'll talk about in a minute, and is one of your assignments in this course, but you're not necessarily having to test it for validity before you do your research. All right, so writing questions based on literature. What this means is based on the literature you've read, and for this course, it doesn't have to be something that you've already written about in this course or an article that you've already cited. It can be your whole base of literature that you've been working with through the program so far. And the themes that you're seeing in the literature and the points that are being made that you're going, okay, that's something I'm going to want to write about in my lit review. We're not doing a lit review in this class, but when you're thinking that probably means that's something worth checking out in your research, right? So that's how you can build your questions from the literature. This is much more time consuming, obviously, than finding something ready-made, even if you're tweaking a ready-made item. This is going to really require you to dig into the literature and to spend the time developing those questions. This is certainly a valid method. The reason I don't kind of put it out in the spotlight for this course is because of our timing, right? It is time consuming. However, as I've mentioned in the last few weeks, the goal of this course is not to develop the best of anything. So the best research, the best instrument, have the best data collection and the best analyses. It's to go through the process. Do I want you to do something for all of those aspects that is valuable for you to have something to move forward in terms of the learning process of how to do these things, and potentially a base to bring forward with you of information? Yes. But the reality is the time, that's what we need to be concerned with. So I'm pointing this out again because if you are in a position where you're going to write questions from the literature, absolutely fine. Do you have the time to agonize over them and analyze the questions, for weeks and us to go back and forth? No. So the questionnaire may not be the strongest questionnaire at the end of the day. It may not be the one that you would take and do your dissertation research with, but it certainly could be one that is a base for you to then tweak and analyze and build into a more, a stronger questionnaire if you were going to use it for your dissertation. The third one is tweak an existing quantitative instrument. So typically you're going to see many more quantitative instruments in your field of study, direct or indirect. And when you find those, it's often fairly, I don't want to say easy, but it's maybe easier or less time consuming than the second option to tweak those into qualitative questions. And some questionnaires or scales are going to be a lot easier to transition to qualitative than others. Some, it might just be like you change the ending of the question and boom, now it's open-ended. Perfect. Some you might have to kind of finagle it a little bit and then make it, into qualitative. What you would do for something like that is you would say, a citation at the bottom of your instrument or your questionnaire would say adapted from, and you list the instrument or instruments that you used to create your questionnaire. And you'd be doing that for options 1 and 3, just so that you're giving credit to the original instruments and the authors. For number 2, you're not obviously basing it on an existing instrument, but you may want to include, citations of work of how these were, questions developed based on the research of, and then you would have kind of a small list of, or a list of your citations. So hopefully this helps to clear up the anxiety of, oh my gosh, how do I develop this qualitative questionnaire? Or I can't find one, what do I do? For the people that are on, I'm going to ask if you have any questions that, because that might be helpful for people that watch this later. So do any of you have questions on this? Does this make sense?
Mhm.
Okay, head shaking, good. Okay, so I'm going to stop the video. I will post this for the week 3 information, and hopefully this will be helpful.